Brazil's presidential campaign heats up with just 1 month to go until Election Day. There were 6 candidates in the first debate, but all eyes were on Lula da Silva and Jair Bolsonaro. Hurling insults and accusations, Lula maintains his lead in the polls, but can he keep it? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Brazil's election campaign. Jair Bolsonaro is heading into next month's vote with a pretty grim outlook, saying his only 3 options are prison, being killed, or victory. Legal cases over corruption and misinformation during the coronavirus pandemic have the incumbent lagging well behind his opponent in the polls. And while the gap between him and Lula da Silva has been narrowing slightly, Bolsonaro seems to be reading straight from former U.S. President Donald Trump's playbook. He still claims Brazil's voting system is rigged. He calls Lula an illegitimate candidate and criminal, saying he could only win through fraud. And if Bolsonaro loses, he says he's unwilling to concede defeat unless an audit is carried out, a procedure that doesn't exist in the country's legal system. All of this and more was spelled out during a heated debate between the top 2 candidates.
This week's debate saw the 2 frontrunners in Brazil's presidential election exchange insults, and not always to each other. Jair Bolsonaro wasted no time calling Lula da Silva an ex-convict and accusing him of running the most corrupt government in Brazil's history.
There was corruption. President Lula, you want to come back. What for? To keep doing the same thing at Petrobras?
Petrobras is a national gas company at the center of a 2014 corruption scandal. A broader criminal investigation led to Lula's imprisonment, but he was released after it was determined that the prosecutor and judge in the case were conspiring against him. Lula defended himself from the accusations and took credit for Petrobras' growth under his tenure.
It is unspeakable what we have just heard. The president should have been informed that it was exactly in our government that Petrobras got to the size it has.
The argument devolved into a yelling match, with another candidate on stage telling the 2 to settle down. Bolsonaro also was forced to go on the defensive over the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest and the country's economic struggles.
Some people are hungry, yes, but not in this exaggerated number. It is complicated and easy to demagogue with the numbers here. This is inadmissible.
Then came a question about Brazil's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. An estimated 700,000 people have died. And a female reporter wanted to know about the country's vaccination rates. Bolsonaro responded with a deeply personal attack.
Vera, I couldn't expect anything else from you. You sleep thinking about me. You have passion for me. You can't take a side in a debate like this and make false accusations. With my respect, you are a disgrace for Brazilian journalism.
The journalist stated later that Bolsonaro was only hurting himself by making such comments. He has faced previous criticisms for his treatment of women in the past. But several days after the debate, opinion polls have narrowed slightly, still putting da Silva on top in the first round of voting, although surveys predict that da Silva would easily recapture office in a runoff. Until then, there are at least 2 more debates scheduled before the October 2nd vote.
So to talk more about the campaign and the upcoming election in Latin America's most populous country and its biggest economy are from Boston, Chief Executive of the Caesar Group Incorporated, Julio Morais. From Washington, D.C. is Elcior Santana, an adjunct professor at the Center for Latin American Studies at Georgetown University. And from Sao Paulo is Gustavo Riberio, the founder of the Brazilian Report. Thanks all so much for being with us. Let's start then with that first debate. Yeah, at the very least, it kind of reinforced that this really is a 2-man race. But what did it actually say about those candidates? And has it changed any voters' minds? Let me start in Sao Paulo with Gustavo.
Well, I don't think the debate changed much because polls already show that around 80% of the electorate has already made up their minds. We have two candidates that one is a former president, the other is the current president, so their name recognition is unparalleled. The polarization leads voters to pick a side much earlier than in other races. And also, Lula and Bolsonaro Lula fared poorly, and Bolsonaro's showing was horrendous in this debate, so I don't think it would help them at all.
Very interesting. Let me talk to Julio, though, I mean, especially with Bolsonaro's performance, because we're all familiar, you know, with the sound bites taken from the first debate. And one that has been replayed is Jair Bolsonaro taking specific aim at a female reporter. And it's led to some complaints of misogyny and insensitivity. But that's not necessarily out of character for Bolsonaro. So do you think it mattered?
Well, I think it does matter. First of all, in my personal opinion, I think the first debate was a national disaster. I think all the candidates point to everyone problem, but they never focus on present the solution for the problem for Brazil. Jair Bolsonaro, when he stepped up, I think the reporter was wrong when she took a side on the question. I think Bolsonaro was very unfortunate when he continued to say comments about her. I think they're going to affect his campaign. I think after that, all the candidates went after him because of his comment. And in my personal opinion, he should measure his words when he's on television.
Interesting. But I mean, do you think this debate served to change any minds? I mean, Gustavo says it did not. What's your take?
Well, I think not. I agree with Gustavo. But what I see is the candidate kind of change a little bit. Bolsonaro changed a lot of his tone and the way he's approached the Brazilian electoral citizen. He changed his mind on regarding the election fairness. Now he's go against the pro-goal campaign from the radical right wing from his party. So what I noticed was the candidate kind of changed a little bit so they can absorb the undecided electoral Brazilians.
Okay, Elcior, I can see you taking some notes there. I'm just wondering, I mean, do you agree with Gustavo saying that they both performed pretty badly?
Yes and no, in the following sense. I think this first debate was a warming up exercise. It was, I mean, they have heavy guns have not been used. And as we progress, I mean, there will be several debates. And I think things will tend to become more, let's say, harder than this debate was. I think the debate was sort of lucky, was direct to the basis, and they didn't actually, they played very safe.
Okay.
In addition, the debate actually had two layers. You had three real candidates to the presidency, and you had three other people who are actually candidates to the governorship of their state. So that made the debate a bit strange.
Okay. Who do you think really is the third contender then? I'm curious, because we only really hear mention of the two frontrunners, and the rest are kind of just accessories in there.
No, I think that you have Lula, you have Bolsonaro, and Ciro is a real candidate to the presidency. He is way back. I mean, he's trailing the other two, but he has a program. He has a movement behind him, and he's trying to be the third alternative. And it doesn't seem to be working, but that's what he's targeting. I'm referring to Felipe, Soraya, and Tebet. Those three candidates are not presidential candidates. They are preparing for the candidacy to the state.
So this platform for them still serves a very deliberate purpose.
Absolutely.
Let me come
Yeah.
back to Gustavo, though, because, you can't, especially from an international perspective, you cannot help but draw parallels with the United States here. I mean, especially when the incumbent is known as the Trump of the tropics. Hillary Clinton held a double-digit lead in the polls over Trump up until the last weeks of the 2016 election, and we saw what happened there. Any chance the same could happen in Brazil, or are pollsters there somehow better at canvassing the public?
I understand how tempting it is to compare Brazil to the US, but I think it's not necessarily a fair comparison because the political systems are so different. We don't have an electoral college in Brazil, so that makes all the difference. Because in the US, you have, 5, 6 swing states, and that's where the election is played out. In Brazil, we only have the popular vote, so each vote counts equally. And we see that Lula, if you take a look at the polls, most polls have not changed that much over the past year because, like I said, you have the two best known, the two most popular and most polarizing figures in Brazilian politics running. They will be on the ballot, Jair Bolsonaro and Lula. Lula has always been in this low to mid 40 range. And even Bolsonaro has not changed that much in terms of his polling numbers. A year ago, he was polling at 28%, according to one institute. And that same institute has him at 32% in a reading that was published yesterday. So, I mean, we only had one event that significantly changed the polling numbers, which was when former Justice Minister Sergio Moro dropped out of the race. And because of where he stands on the political spectrum, his voters mostly flocked towards Bolsonaro. But even with the government breaking the bank to make stimulus policies, artificially holding down fuel prices, we have not seen the polls budging that much. And with 1 month until election day, I mean, it would have to be an extraordinarily exceptional event to change anything at this point.
Interesting. Julio, I'll come back to you. I mean, it is a fundamental point to make that the electoral systems are completely different. Every vote counts equally in the Brazilian election. But the similarities with Trump's behavior at this point are pretty eerie. I mean, even though Trump really helped create one of the most arguably shameful moments in contemporary U.S. history, Bolsonaro seems to be engaging in the exact same rhetoric. I mean, does he really want to follow that example? And let me ask you as well, how aware are Brazilians of what Trump actually did?
Well, I hope he doesn't follow Trump footsteps because it's going to be a complete disaster in Brazil. What Trump did on January 6th was embarrassment, national embarrassment for U.S. Going back to the election of 2016 compared to 2018, was the same thing. Like the polls was showing Hillary Clinton ahead of Trump. We all thought Hillary would win and then Trump will win. I agree with Gustavo. The system of election is different from U.S. and Brazil, but same thing happened in 2018. Haddad was ahead of the election, and Bolsonaro ended up winning. What I think is the way Brazilian TV do the polls. I say in the last interview, like Global News did a poll which showed Lula ahead, but at the end they showed the number of the interviewers was 995 people, less than 1,000 people. But they posted like 1,000 people kind of decide how the over 100 million should vote. The polls the way Brazil do is different. It's not the right way. Let's say that way.
Okay, Gustavo, you're either confused or you disagree. Why are you shaking your head?
I disagree with what Julio says about the 2018 polls. It's not true that polls showed Haddad ahead. Haddad never was ahead of Bolsonaro in any poll. And the polls were right about some trends. I don't think polls should be read as a sort of clairvoyance exercise that they will get the specific number right, but they show trends. And once Lula was removed of the 2018 race, Bolsonaro was always the front runner. So it's not accurate to say that Haddad was polling ahead and the polls were completely wrong.
Okay. Elcior, if I can come back to you. As for the Brazilian public, I need to ask you, how much are religion and evangelical Christians actually factoring in this time? Because some say they really are, in a sense, the deciders, as they were in 2018. They will be again this time. Do you think that's an exaggeration?
Before I answer to that, just a quick comment. I mean, the polls are very volatile and they have been weaponized. And now you see, including some financial companies financing some polls. So we have to take it with a grain of salt. And let's remember that in 2018, there was something very important that we talked very little about, which was the episode of, let's say, somebody trying to stab Bolsonaro. And then there is a discussion if it happened, if it did not happen. But in any case, what happened was that being in the hospital, Bolsonaro was on the news in the morning, at noon, and at night, reading the medical reports, comments on this, and so on. So he ended up with a time on TV much larger than any other of the competitors.
Okay. And Julio, let me ask you, if you can, to tell us a little bit about the legal cases that are pending against Bolsonaro and his family, and how viable are they, and how do they fit into Bolsonaro saying his options are victory, prison, or being killed?
That's a good question. I don't think he's gonna get arrested. It's a case that's still going on. There's not a final say yet. But same thing happened with Lula. Lula ended up getting accused, being arrested, released, and now he's running again. So that's how Brazil's system, criminology in Brazil works. Once you have power with a well-known person, you end up sneaking away from the accusation. I think right now it's too early to say anything about the Bolsonaro family. I think the Brazilian justice go forward and investigate more and get more details, and let's see what's going to happen.
Okay. Gustavo, I'm coming back to you because, you know, Julio said he hopes that Bolsonaro does not mimic any of the behavior that we saw Trump exhibit in the United States that led to what happened on January 6th. But we have to talk about September 7th in Brazil. It is the 200th anniversary of Brazil's independence, and Bolsonaro has called his supporters to Rio, to Copacabana Beach, and that is when some suspect something could happen along the lines of January 6th. I mean, so far before the election would seem a bit odd, but tell us what you are expecting.
Well, I wouldn't expect anything in the likes of January the 6th to happen next week. First of all, because it would be in Rio. It's not where the government is headed. But I do believe, and some people say that they expect it to be a sort of dress rehearsal for an attempt to convulse the elections. I do believe that we will have a period of political violence that is going to enhance from now until election day. And an association of poll workers in Brazil says they expect, and I quote, extreme violence on election day. They are asking Congress to try to make measures to protect polling stations. The Superior Electoral Court in Brazil has forbidden people to bear arms 48 hours prior to election day until 48 hours after election day in an attempt to prevent this kind of thing from happening. But it's hard to predict what Bolsonaro will do, because it will also depend on the institutional support he will have. A lot of people in the economic elites in Brazil are signaling that they would not support this kind of nonsense. But one thing I think it's safe to assume is that Bolsonaro will not accept the electoral results. Even in 2018, when he won, and he won by a sizable margin, he says that the results were rigged and that he should have won by a much larger margin. So if he loses, which the polls indicate he will, it would really surprise me if he take it gracefully.
Okay, Julio, I mean, if he loses, do you think he will hand over power, and what will Brazil do if he doesn't? What mechanisms are in place?
Well, different than Trump, I don't think Bolsonaro has the whole support to do a January 6th in Brazil. And probably in his mind he has it, but he lost a lot of support from 2018 to today, just showing his radical way to government the country, especially for the COVID too. A lot of people like myself, I don't support the way he's approached the vaccination. Although I still support the president, but I think he lose a lot of support, and I don't think he will have the same support that Trump has to do something like that.
Okay,
And
but
honestly, I apologize. Just to conclude that too, he already changed his tone and accepted the election, the result of the election. That's why I noticed what he's doing right now. He's seeing like he was in the wrong way, just fight against the electoral system. But now he started changing his tone and kind of like he seems he's gonna accept the result.
Okay, Elcior, do you agree there?
Yeah, no, I don't. I think that there are some similarities with Trump in the sense that both they need crisis to move ahead. It's even worse with Bolsonaro because Bolsonaro doesn't have actually a base in the parliament. He has a base with the voters, but the political structure is not behind him. So he has either to co-opt those parties, and he's doing that with the secret budget. Can you believe that? Secret budget. He's trying to buy the election, but he needs a crisis. So I'm afraid and very worried that he could put together some kind of provocateur, some kind of provocation in order to justify and call an emergency situation and therefore cancel election, change election, or something like that.
Because, Gustavo, I mean, we have to be clear that among Trump's supporters, they are not all as potentially dangerous as the ones we saw on January 6th, for example. Does Bolsonaro have that contingent somewhere in there of those types of supporters that could cause a disproportionate amount of trouble and danger for Brazil?
Yes, he has. He has a part of this radical far right in Brazil that fully supports him. And also, we have to notice the fact that during the Bolsonaro administration, gun control laws in Brazil were much loosened, and we saw an explosion in the numbers of new guns registered in Brazil. It's by no means on the same levels as the US, but for Brazilian standards, we have never been as armed as we are right now. And the mechanisms that the government created for new guns to be registered have very little oversight. And evidence points out that criminal organizations are getting their hands on guns legally. And we are seeing this sort of spreading out of Brazilian arming themselves. So combine that with intense radicalization and the fact that we have a president trying to smear the voting system without any shred of evidence whatsoever, and the fact that he's unlikely to take the results. I wouldn't say necessarily something in the same line as January the 6th, but some sort of attempt of upheaval. Yes, that's one of the things we should expect for the next month in Brazil, especially because, and this is a big risk factor, our political system, we have elections in October. Second round would be on October the 30th, but inauguration day of the next government is only on January the 1st. So there are 2 months there during which the president can do a lot of can cause a lot of problems.
Okay, I mean, Julio, I know you. Okay, go ahead, Professor. Yes.
Yeah, just to remind us that in addition to the, let's say, normal people who buy guns and support Bolsonaro, there are some people in the Bolsonaro team that brags about Bolsonaro having 300,000 people supporting him with guns. And they got to that number because they are putting together the police and the military police. And that seems to be one of his bases. And let's remember, Bolsonaro has been linked to militias and to former borderline criminal police type of group.
That will have to be the final word, very unfortunately, for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us. Fascinating discussion. We'll follow up on it as soon as the election happens. Meanwhile, thank you as well to our viewers. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and do subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.